Well, since finding myself back at a lake that I'd forgotten all about, I'm now struggling to forget about it, and it's been playing on my mind ever since. I've done a little bit of research into it, but the only stock photos I can find are of the fish that I caught on my first visit at a much lower weight as a low double. Other than that, information seems to be pretty thin on the ground. I've spoken to a few people, and like a lot of these small waters, it seems that it's suffered from either flooding or low levels, cormorants, but people seem to think that there are some tension here, there are some perch and rudd, and of course there are the carp. From what I've seen, or from what I've been able to identify, and I'm by no means an authority on the stock, I've managed to pick out 4 mirror carp that are easily identifiable, 2 common carp, and then a unknown number of smaller common carp, the kind of peas in a pod, Sussex cricket bats. There may be 2 of them, there may be 22 of them, there may be 222 of them, I really don't know, but of the bigger fish it seems to just come down to half a dozen or so, and that's the big mirror that I caught on my first visit, a sandy coloured mirror, a heavily scaled mirror, and then a smaller mirror that looks similar to the big fish. And then there are 2 commons, one with a very distinctive dorsal fin, which was the fish that was feeding off the surface alongside the big mirror in the first video, and then a very light coloured common, not a ghosty, a more golden coloured common. But that's all I had to go on really, so I thought, well, I'm going to go down there with the float and pellet and just see what's about. And I spent a good while wandering around baiting up likely looking spots, and then the idea was to just travel light and drop in on each spot and see if I could find some fish feeding. And this spot up by the reeds, there was definitely fish feeding, and judging by the size of the bubbles, I'd suggest it was probably carp. So I was hopeful of catching a few more of the stock, or at least finding out a bit more about what's in here. But I have noticed that they are very spooky fish, and I really don't think there is that many in here. But I could see a couple of fish cruising in and out of these reeds and dipping down and taking the odd mouthful of bait here and there, which is just pellet. And sure enough, a few bubbles came up and I missed it, which was shocking. Absolutely shocking. I couldn't quite believe it. So that was that spot out for a while at least. But I took another walk around and I found a few more bubbles on the other side of the reeds this time. And I thought maybe, I wasn't sure again, could have been tench. I was leaning towards carp. I felt it could be a tench, the bubbles were smaller, moving less quickly. I didn't really care, I just wanted to catch something. But it is very much an exercise in concentration. And sure enough, once again, the float started to dip. The bubbles came up. I left it a bit longer this time and promptly missed it again. Terrible behaviour, or terrible angling. Now at this point the whole lake shut up shop, and I basically spent the rest of the day wandering around aimlessly looking for fish and enjoying the wildlife. There was a grass snake out and about, only a little one, but he was very quick. And then a triplane paid a visit. I didn't think there was many of those left flying. I thought for a moment it was Dick Dastardly out trying to catch his pigeon. And in between times I was just walking and baiting and baiting and walking, and I still didn't see any more fish. This is something most lakes of this nature that I've fished, quite often what you'll find is that certain areas will have resident fish, and then there'll be one or two groups of transient fish that swim around the whole lake and visit the other groups. But here I'm only seeing the fish I see at the top end of the lake are the same group of fish that I see at the bottom end of the lake, are the same group of fish that I see in the middle of the lake. They do seem to just be this small group, unless it's the small commons that are resident fishing areas, but I can't tell those apart so easily. Now I do bait quite heavily, and that's not because I'm trying to feed lots of fish, it's because by baiting heavily I'm just trying to get the fish to dip down. Something I'd noticed is that there's another bite, but something I'd noticed is that they'll come in, take a mouthful and then disappear for maybe 30 seconds to 3 hours. Now this fish was off and away quick. I've got reeds to the left, reeds to the right, a weed bed in front of me, and there's also lily pads out to the left and right as well. So there's an awful lot of angles and luck involved in landing these fish, and this one I had to take to my heels, and unfortunately I knocked the camera over in the process, but I actually ended up having to move along the lake to the next cutout in the reeds in order to get a good enough angle to keep the fish out of everything. And I finally got it in, and it was one of the distinguishable commons, and you can see this one's got a very distinct dorsal fin that stands out a lot in the water. Whether that's a natural thing, whether that's as a result of a cormorant attack, I don't know, but I nicknamed that one the flag common, and it's one of the bigger commons for sure. There's that one and the golden common that really do stand out, and this wasn't until the sun was going down and it was evening, and I thought for sure that was my chance gone, and I was actually in the process of packing up when I noticed there was another fish. And I'm fishing very, very simple tactics. I'm just fishing over hard pellet, and I've taken to carrying a selection of these dynamite durable hookers in the 6mm sizes, and you can fish them as one, as two, as half a pellet for crucians, and I found them to be really, really versatile. And then I've got a telltale shot. I'd actually moved it away from the hook after missing those 2 bites in the morning, because I wasn't sure that they weren't line bites. I'm sure they weren't line bites, but I couldn't understand how I'd missed 2 on the bounce. But there was definitely another fish in the area, and as I say, they'll cruise in, take a couple of mouthfuls and then just disappear. So it's a case of stalking the fish within the baited patch. But I did manage to hook this one. and this one ran straight out towards the weed bed. And I don't mind that too much, because it's a very silty bottom and it's quite shallow, so the weed doesn't root that hard, and I'd far rather that they went into the weed than into the reeds or the lily pads. But it didn't quite make it as far as the weed bed, but it's probably the lesser of the hazards out there. And I could see quite early on that it was one of the mirror carp. And after a bit of a tussle where it was trying to get round the corner of the reeds, I managed to get it a bit more central and a bit more lined up, where I could play it on a straight line. And as it came to the net, it was quite clear it was what I believe to be the second largest carp in there. Sort of sandy coloured mirror. So after a fairly disastrous start, it was turning into a far better evening. Didn't weigh this fish. It was a safe mid-double, maybe a little more. Big shoulders. And by now dusk was starting to set in, and I threw out a handful of floaters just to watch, really. And another of the mirrors started feeding, and this one's got a very distinctive feeding style. It almost porpoises as it takes off the surface, and this is the one I really want to catch. This is a scaly mirror, and I wasn't going to try it right on dusk, but it's certainly a very, very good reason to plan a return visit as soon as possible.